Efendim merhaba.
Welcome. We're going to discuss the role of journalism and information in a polarized world. We have 3 invited journalists. 2 are here, but 1 is still detained, imprisoned, so he is not here with us, although his thoughts are with us. First of all, we're going to read his letter, if you would allow us, and then we will continue to talk. The speech text sent by Ahmet Altan on September 10th, 2018 from the Silivri closed prison to be read at the 2nd session of the Looking into the Past, Envisioning the Future conference on the 2nd anniversary of his arrest. Here's the text. History grows from humanity's weakness, fed by evil. Weakness, the most obvious cause of the bloody chaos that we call history, is, I believe, the desire for superiority. The desire of a Macedonian king to capture India, a Mongol emperor's passion to send his horsemen all the way to Anatolia, Napoleon's decision to possess Moscow, Hitler's dream of becoming the sole master of the world seems to me very difficult to explain in terms of the instinct of gain, intelligence or logic, because in the end none of them gained anything through these attacks. On the contrary, they and their societies paid very heavy prices. If they had acted intelligently, logically, and truly in keeping with their desire for gain, they would not have had to do any of those things. The past is full of hundreds, thousands of such logically unexplainable examples, and even more confusing is humanity's failure to gain a lesson from these bloody episodes as they embrace this ambition to be superior while fully aware of the heavy prices to be paid. Today, this morbid weakness is enthroned with the slogan of nationalism. And what's more, today, when advances in science make living together in comfort and peace a possibility, the stubborn continuation of this bloody idiocy places this deadly weakness in humanity's soul squarely before us, more obviously and clearly than ever before. Releasing themselves as if drunk to the horrid embrace of their weaknesses, people become the greatest enemy of intellectuals who warn them that this weakness will lead them to an excruciating annihilation. I believe that the most defining characteristic of those who praise and exalt themselves in their weakness is anti-intellectualism. They want not only to kill intellectuals, but also humiliate, scorn, and denigrate them. When Stefan Zweig committed suicide in Brazil in 1942, a Nazi-allied newspaper in Germany made the statement in an article about his death, quote, "One more refugee's life has ended in the usual way," unquote. A talentless columnist in love with his nation, his party, and his Führer was able to belittle a writer like Zweig and believe himself to be superior to him. Hitler granted that columnist the delusion that he was superior to Zweig, and in return, that columnist supported Hitler's atrocities with all his heart. Today, crowds of people running with the cheap slogans of a primitive sort of nationalism called populism relinquish the comforts of thousands of years of science and art for no reason other than to punish those who are unlike themselves, to feel superior, and to denigrate intellectuals. We see societies drink the poison of nationalism like opium addicts, unconcerned that this poison will annihilate them. There is only one antidote to the poison of nationalism that drags societies to their ruin: intellectuals. As societies drink the poison of nationalism that will kill them, the survival instinct within them also creates intellectuals, the antidote to the poison. At the conclusion of this fundamental inner struggle, the society experiences the fiery battle between the poison and antidote within its system, and at the end of this battle, the society determines its fate. Throughout history, countless clans, tribes, nations, and states have been wiped from the earth. We don't even remember the names of most of them. When we examine the process of their disappearance, we generally see that the societies that annihilated their intellectuals annihilated themselves as well. This erasure of societies from history does not result from only the lack of intellectuals' warnings. It also stems from their loss of the vitality that allows intellectuals to live and the strength to produce the antidote to the poison they have drunk. Today, as the volcanoes of nationalism on all sides spew their toxic lava onto the masses, those with the vitality to support intellectuals in the face of this dreadful poison will very likely survive the epidemic. Those who do not support intellectualism, that lose that vitality, will disappear. As for the question of what will happen in Turkey, nationalism is boiling up. The intellectuals are gradually decreasing, scattering, and becoming impotent. Society cannot produce its own antidote. To me, it appears that Turkey's salvation cannot come chiefly from the creation of a political opposition, but from an intellectual opposition, and the creation of an antidote that will cleanse society's system of the deadly effects of nationalism. So, does Turkey have the vitality to create the antidote that will clear the poison within it? Today, unfortunately, as we remember Hrant Dink, who was killed while trying to convey the importance of peace, it is very difficult to answer in the positive. But despite everything, I believe that Turkey is a country of miracles. It has gone through dark, cruel periods before in which nationalism went wild and intellectuals were killed and silenced. At the last minute, this society managed to cling to life and create intellectuals once again. I hope it will pull this off once again. To give up this hope will mean accepting that society will die of the poison it has so thirstily drunk. And until I die, I am determined not to drink that poison or to lose hope.
Evet, şimdi
we have two very prominent journalists with us, Amira and Alper Görmüş. We are going to talk about a polarized world. But if you would allow me, I would like to say two more things. This is the interglacial. Polarized is not enough. It's the glacial period, really. It's the interglacial because it's not going to continue. It's not sustainable. For the last 5-6 years, when you look at the elections of the last 5-6 years, you would know, including the elections, the recent elections in Sweden, you would see that more walls are being brought up between countries, between more than 60 countries. So polarized is a euphemism. It's not a polarized world anymore. It's like a glacial period, and we're going back to those times, not even really going back to those times before the Cold War. It's because the fabric is even more complicated today. In order to understand the day that we live in, we really do need to turn to intellectuals who produce the right thinking, and we need journalists who speak the right words. So I will start with Amira. Amira chose, as an Israeli person, to live in Palestine. She has experience from her own parents, her own family, and she has her own experience today. Amira lives in Gaza, is one of the first journalists to decide to live there. So I'm going to ask her, how does she stay independent, unbiased in this really difficult environment, and the disadvantages and the advantages of being a journalist in such a geography?
Look, I don't know if it's even important. I have to stress that in comparison to all of you here, as many other Israeli Jewish journalists, we face no obstacles. Actually, ours is the case of democracy. We can exercise the right, our right to give information, our right to investigate, our right to curse the government, to curse the occupation, to curse everything that you want, to use very impolite words, but to be very accurate, and nothing happens to us. We are not put in jail. I don't risk myself when I come here to talk to you and to speak against the policies of my government and long-term policies of my country, my state. So the personal story is I must say, is the least here, is the very minor in comparison to everybody here, everybody's personal story of the other people who attend here. I think we all share this sense of importance that we attribute to information and to knowledge because we believe in people's intellect, we believe in people's integrity, intellectual integrity. So we assume that once people know about wrongdoing, once they know, once this obstacle of ignorance is being removed, people will act. People will do something against their wrongdoing. And I must tell you that we in Israel are the example that these hopes are maybe exaggerated. Because as I said, we exercise this right, there is information in Israel, there is a lot of information, a lot of Israeli groups, not only of journalists, but many NGOs that gather information and publish information, and very, very criminating information on Israeli and Israelis' acts of violence, bureaucratic violence, not only military violence, institutionalized violence against the Palestinians. People know, but people don't have the duty either to know. People get the information, they don't have the duty either to know or to act against it. Because if they profit, then they couldn't care less. And if they can, and this includes also, unfortunately, this includes also in Israeli intellectuals, Israeli Jewish intellectuals, and Israeli Jewish intellectuals who are engaged in very, very important researches about anti-Semitism, for example, and about the history of anti-Semitism. But when we write, when we publish information about the ways Palestinians are being harassed and dispossessed, they don't raise their voice. And they are intellectuals. So this has been the real experience of my life personally, that I also 25 or 30 years ago when I started engaging in journalism, I thought that this knowledge, this very, very meticulous details that I bring about occupation will shock people who will say, we didn't know, and they will act accordingly. But this aspiration that I had, or this hope that I had, or this illusion, I mean, this has proven as an illusion.
Doğru. Yani bütün yaşadıklarımızda
That is so strikingly true. So in whatever we live through, these civilians, pure civilians, also have a contribution. This is very striking. Thank you. Now, Alper, journalism in a polarized world. Now, Alper lives in Turkey, where a polarized world could not be more polarized. So I will share with you something now. 64% of the adult population in this country, they cannot reach a decision by looking at the real actors of a wrongdoing. They decide according to where they stand politically. So if they're supporters of AKP, for instance, automatically they're on their side. And in Turkey, if you go to Migros or BİM today, you find some brands, for instance, and some of these brands, I mean, ask every 4 people who go into the supermarkets, they will name you at least one brand that they will never buy the products of. Why? Because of that brand's political affiliation. Okay, so everything is political in this country and completely polarized. So Alper, you live in this country where polarized is at its zenith. How does it feel to be a journalist here? How does it feel to be on one side here in this country? Thank you, and hello everybody. Journalism in a polarized world. Under a tyrant government. I mean, doing journalism in a polarized world is as difficult as being a journalist under a tyrannist government. And we have both. We have a tyrannist government and a polarized country. And we are trying to exercise journalism in such an environment, in such a country. In the morning session, I was listening to all the speakers. Our American colleague was surprised by upon hearing certain things, you know. You could see that he was surprised. I actually experienced a similar surprise in 2011. In 2011, we went to a training program for journalists, and there was a discussion there. I remembered that discussion. There were some texts during that training, and the texts were prepared by our American colleagues. You know, journalism in a digital era, ethical problems. Here were some of the titles that we were, you know, discussing. And in the training program, they said the following. What really makes readers or watchers of TV angry is if it's obvious that you are only explaining the story from one angle, and not any other angle. Now, they had started out the training program by saying this. And I had thought that back then, I had thought that this was really naive because I was already in a polarized world and I knew what it meant. The definition, of course, was the definition of good journalism. You can't be a journalist by looking at something from only one angle, and you cannot expect the public to accept that journalism, that kind of journalism, as good journalism, right? Because if you only look at the issue from only one angle, and if you only advocate that angle, then something is amiss. And I tried to explain the following. Some readers in Turkey will not really be so outraged by by such violations, let's say, because readers will read news as news are presented to them, and they will be okay to accept it as it is. Some American colleagues were shocked. They said, how could that be? Because I said it's a polarized world, and that's how things are back in my country. Even if journalism, wrote false news, people would still accept. Well, anyway, Turkey really wanted to become very much like America. That was the aspiration many, many years ago. So maybe we're becoming more like them and they're becoming more like us. Now maybe they understand better what it means to be a journalist in a polarized world. Amira made really striking comments here, because you really believe that if you present the right information and the right knowledge, the result will be an enlightened society. No, That's not the case in a polarized society, because there are conflicting interests, and when there are conflicting interests, you can yell until you're blue in the face. You wouldn't be able to get through. Some people will applaud you, will command you, will like it. But the other group of people they can only perceive it at a certain extent anyway, and they regard you as the enemy. From now on, you're the enemy, and the only reason you're publishing such news is because you are in opposition and you're the enemy. So, in a polarized society, under a tyrant government, is really difficult. I will try to explain why. If Bekir Ağırdır asks me the right questions, I will try to elaborate on this, but this is all I will say, I guess. No? Here then. For, to exercise journalism under difficult conditions, all you need is courage. If you are okay in going to prison, for instance, or if you accept that this might be the consequence, then you can exercise journalism, and you need courage and endurance. But in other conditions, where there is a tyrant whose aim is to hide information, is to not to show it to people, you are stealing that information with difficulty, and you show it to the public, although the government is trying to hold it back. They're doing everything to hold it back, and you're doing everything to show it to the society, but the society doesn't care. There's really nothing worse than that. There was a Chinese movie, I remember this. This was in 1990s. Two young people belonging to the Communist Party. They're oppressed, they're under torture, they are beaten up, but they believe. They continue to believe. They continue to work for the party. Until which time, when the political party, their party, sends them to work somewhere. And they suddenly understand that what people do not care about what they do, because they think that it's imposed from the outside. So you don't care about even oppression. You don't care about going to prison. But when your own audience, the audience that you're trying to enlighten, the audience that you're trying to serve, when they turn to you and say, we don't need this information, we don't believe in this information, when your target audience actually hurts you in that way, this really breaks you. Torture doesn't break you, going to prison doesn't break you, but the fact that your own audience, the audience that you're trying to enlighten, turns to you and says, you're the enemy, I don't care about what you write, that really breaks your soul. Okay. I don't know if I'm exaggerating here, but from what I hear from both of you, you seem to be also disappointed that the public does not give the right reaction to what you write about, what you portray, what you demonstrate through journalism. But of course, the public is also, growing. It's also more educated today. We should not pay heed to disappointments as well. I also want to believe that people in Israel, in Palestine, people here in Turkey, they do learn. All the same, even when they don't do anything, they learn. So, for the human rights movement, for peace, from now on in the future, what kind of threats, what kind of opportunities do you see in the future? Amira, microphone, please. I can't hear you.
I think there is a big... Too many devices. I think there is a big difference between your experience here in Turkey or the Palestinian experience under Israeli occupation and Palestinian media under occupation, and our case. Look, when I write for the Israeli audience, I write for a people that has a vested interest in the continuation of occupation. So I cannot expect from them what you expect of your own people when you write about authoritarianism in Turkey. Our work, the journalists in Israel, our work is closely connected with the work of activists, human rights activists, leftist activists, people who right now I know are in a village, in a Bedouin village that the Israeli authorities are about to demolish any moment, and this is in order to be able to expand Israeli colony and some Israeli colonies east of Jerusalem. So our work is connected with them, and we hope to reach, if not the Israeli public, we hope to reach others in the world. Yes, I must admit it, that when I write, I know that I will have, I don't know, 500, 600 readers in Hebrew. I don't know the numbers. But anyway, most of them are, I'm preaching to the converted. Most of them, those who want to read me, agree. But we are trying to appeal to the outside world. But as we said, the outside world is full now with authoritarian regimes. And I would say that now we are not in a polarized world. Maybe we are, I don't know a world which has not been polarized in the past. But this polarized world now, is shifting to ideas and ideologies that we thought were losing in the past. I don't have a crystal ball. I think I don't know what will happen. I do think that, and that's another disillusioning conclusion and experience, that the good does not prevail necessarily, and we have to remember this, which doesn't mean we should give up, but this is not the spiral upwards that maybe some of us were educated in the past to believe in. Yet activism, and this is where I want to stress, journalism is not enough by itself. And even your courageous journalism, really, and I cannot stress enough how your journalism is courageous, because you risk things that we do not risk in Israel, in the democracy for Jews, as it is called. We do not risk, but it's never enough. Activism and going to the people and working with people and standing up, and I think that also sometimes listening to why people don't want to listen to this kind of, to our intellectual interpretations of the world. I think this is also something that we have to learn together in order to try and make my pessimism not in place.
Şimdi bu aktivizm de gerekir.
I do understand. I totally do understand journalism is linked with activism. But in Turkey, yes, journalism, is it being an activist, being, you know, what is it really in Turkey? In today's world, everything has become more digital, and what do you do against finding the, you know, confirming, let's say confirming the information that you get? It's my question to you. Because we're in the world of social media, internet, everybody has, you know, opinions. There's misinformation everywhere, scattered all around. So what do you do in order to make sure that that information is actually correct?
I verify the information from from being there, not from reading, not from looking for information in the media, in this whatever social media and I'm not there in order to get information from the authorities and from people who are in charge, but on the contrary, from the ground. This is a basic, but I think that this is also what characterizes your work as well. Getting information from the people. Social media is a problem, but it's also a blessing. Because what we have in Israeli media, there are those websites of human rights organizations that bring a lot of information. There are some leftist websites, independent websites, that bring information, and sometimes on real time, and in a way they became some sort of a competition of good mainstream papers, such as Haaretz. So Haaretz is more to the mainstream, but it always knows that there are some of those kind of musharibin, how do I say, Zoaran, how do I say it in Arabic, in English? Naughty media venues who are quicker than us and bring also information that maybe our mainstream big boat was slower in bringing forward. Also, because we have, and Haaretz too, we have the power, because we are in a, again I would say, democracy for Jews, we are listened to sometimes, but we may affect a change in some individual cases. I would say humanitarian cases, but not in the real thing, which is Israeli colonialism. So the drive, the enterprise of Israeli colonialism continues in spite of the vast information and studies that you have also about the deception that has been used and the twisting of Israeli laws in order to enable this enterprise, this colonialist enterprise. So social media, I would say, can be used as a very important source and as a supplier of information that is open to everybody. But again, people don't have the duty to use it.
All right, I will ask the same question to an individual who has been at the epicenter of debates of this fashion for a really long time. The digitalization and the communication over the internet became very easy. And how are you capable of analyzing the accuracy of the news that flow to you, and how can you avoid manipulation through inaccurate information? As you were working for a newspaper called Taraf. Yes, in countries, in communities like ours, it's very difficult to say, but there are two enemy lines, and I'm not going to shy away from using this word because we've become adversaries. There are two sides to the Turkish community, and they're both enemies to one another. Each side is concerned with the benefit of their own disciples or followers, and they all expect the journalists to write about or talk about the things that they believe are true, that they believe are accurate. And this community cannot tolerate views, discerning views, other than his own. This is a war, this is a battle, and the tools are developing according to the nature of this war. One section of the community is feeding on inaccurate information because it relieves them. It makes them feel comfortable. They believe lies because they choose to believe the lies. And some other powers are deceiving journalists through inaccurate or falsified documents, papers, and evidence, and they believe it's only right and fair for them to use inaccurate information in order to convince the masses. And as I've said before, this is just a war, and the tools are very much compliant with the nature of this war. So journalists need to be very careful. We have to be on the edge all the time. Looking back with the experience of today, we thought that Turkey was being blocked because of a certain specific problem that we needed to tackle, and that problem should have been eliminated if we were to enjoy democracy forever in this country without any interruptions whatsoever. That was how excited and enthusiastic we were when we began our careers as journalists. But in time, our enthusiasm eroded, and we are trying to remain calm. We are trying to analyze every information that we receive meticulously. And we should have been this way when we began. We should have been less excited, we should have been less enthusiastic, and we should have been more careful. I'm personally speaking, when we started publishing Taraf, we made some mistakes. I don't know what my other colleagues will have to say in this matter, but I can personally and confidently say that there were certain mistakes made, although I wasn't directly involved in the kitchen side of Taraf magazine, but about the diaries we had published back in the days of the Nokta magazine. It was lucky of us to have amassed that document that we published in Nokta magazine. Late Mehmet Ali Birand and the then Ankara representative of the Hürriyet Daily, I think it was Metehan Demir, and third, quite strikingly, a copy of this document was sent to Mustafa Balbay from Cumhuriyet newspaper. They never published these diaries. They thought these diaries were correct, they were real documents, but they shied away from printing those articles and those diaries. Misleading information and inaccurate information can be used as a machine of war, and that was the time when we witnessed this personally and very destructively. It never used to exist in the past in Turkey. The journalists could afford the luxury of publishing anything that they wished. But sometimes some journalists had the luxury of being able to dump some information without publishing it according to their own benefits and according to their own choosing. But as I said, we are talking about a polarized country. And when you do stuff like this, half of this country will applaud you and the other half will kill you the moment they lay hands on you. So being a journalist is a very difficult task in polarized nations. When you published those diaries, a process was initiated which still is going on right now. When you look at the current state of the Turkish media, we are always discussing freedom of expression, freedom of choice, and some political parties finding it very difficult to make their voices heard during the campaigns, during the rallies. Why do you think is this the case? Yes, of course, we've always been experiencing this. We have to abide by truth, regardless of who will applaud you or who will kill you. The number of the journalists are going down who are willing to flow this information if they think that information is accurate and true. During these times, the number of brave journalists to circulate the accurate information is going down tremendously. And some journalists can easily switch sides according to their own benefits and according to their own interests. Because they want to remain in power, they have to, or they wish to benefit from the power. The Turkish journalists are, as you are aware, were not very popular any longer. Their articles were not being read or followed by masses. Sometimes I get the same question. Well, you used to criticize these journalists switching sides all the time quite harshly. Why don't you do that anymore? I'm not excited anymore. I'm not enthusiastic anymore. That's why I don't criticize these journalists switching sides overnight. I'm not pointing out to their mistakes because I don't wish to do that anymore. Because these people are not journalists in my point of view. What am I going to say about them? How am I going to criticize them? How am I going to tell them that they're making mistakes? You say they're making mistakes intentionally? Of course they're making mistakes intentionally. There's nothing to correct. Yes, definitely. What they do is not journalism. And 80% of the journalists and maybe media outlets are consisting of individuals like this. Yeah, we're talking about intentional mistakes, deliberate mistakes, so there's nothing more to discuss. Polarization has got several different definitions, but one of my definitions is as the following. If you become polarized, you become deaf. You stop listening to the other party. You're just interested in your benefits and interested in your well-being without hearing what the others have to say. Post-truth is something that we've been discussing quite recently. Confucius states the following: nothing can be more difficult than searching for a white cat in a dark room, especially if the cat is not there in that room. Polarization creates the following. Somebody tells us that there's a white cat in a dark room, and we start searching for that cat, but nobody tells us that the cat is missing, actually. For example, the current financial crisis, we're discussing it from such a misled or misconstrued perspective that the essence of the crisis cannot be tackled with. We're always talking about new phenomena rising because of the new technologies, such as citizen journalists or internet journalism or smartphone journalism, so on and so forth. So the real journalism is nowhere to be found. You're calling it postmodern world, and I'm calling it the information age. Whatever you call it, the laws, the journalism, and the politics cannot be reproduced. That's why we are going through a crisis. The former models of the global order can no longer be sustained because we find ourselves in a dead end. However, we need to redefine freedom, redefine security, and redefine truth and the flow of information. The people are always choosing safety over freedom, or security over freedom. That's why they vote in the ways that we don't seem to like. But there's nothing to be angry about this. The new world is going to emerge, but how will the media outlets be restructured? And that's what I'm curious about. I'm asking you about the future, Amira. What is the future of the media in this modern world, do you think?
I guess I'm more conservative than you are, because I think that the media is changing and shaping according to the new technologies, but in essence, it doesn't change so much, as I see it, at least in my... I think that people... you know, I write for an Italian weekly called Internazionale. It's not the Internazionale that you might think about, but it's international news. But it is leaning to the left, of course. And every year they have a festival in Ferrara, in Italy. It might end soon because the mayor, the municipality might change soon and become, be won over by the right wing. But for the past 12 years or so, it held a journalism festival where people were experts and journalists, renowned journalists, less renowned journalists from all over the world, came to speak with Italians, and mostly young Italians. And that was from the first time that this took place. We were astonished by the number of people and young people in Berlusconi's land, you know, who came thirsty for real information. So you could say it was kind of live newspaper. And every year more young people come. And it's lectures of 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, with translation, so it's not easy, and people are there. So being the conservative that I am, I think that some basics do not change. And you can always reach people who do want the information and will use the information in the new ways, but it's the old-fashioned information about the world that they want to know about the world. What they do with it is another question. So people who don't want to know will want to know either it is new technology or old technology. So this, for me, this kind of question is, I just don't know how to answer it. Especially because I'm bound to our reality, our Israeli-Palestinian reality, where still I see that information is very much part of our life, and that's why it's very much part of our life that it doesn't matter if we bring the accurate information. You know, we have the Freedom of Information Act, according to which many Israelis go and demand to get information from the Israeli authorities in a very elaborate way. And the Israeli authorities have to give information, and if they don't, we go to court or into high court. And very often high court, for example, especially when it comes to Israeli contacts with military regimes and dictatorships and murderous dictatorships and Israeli sale of arms to dictatorships. So the information given is scanty, is not complete, but the subject is being discussed. Does it stop Israel? Does it not stop Israel? As was said, as Catherine said before, we are raising the bar is being raised, but some people discuss now that, oh, Israel helped Burma while a mass killing was taking place or a genocide was taking place. Israel was helping Burma. Israel has good ties with Burma in times that this is happening, and this is wrong. So there is discussion. Or the president of the Philippines comes and visits Yad Vashem, and this is a few months after he praised Hitler. Yad Vashem is a memorial institution to the Holocaust. So how can you do that? So we develop the means, the new means according to the new laws and new technologies, and we are facing the same contradictions. And I think that maybe in Thucydides' times they faced the same contradictions, but on a different scale. The question should be how to make people understand that it's their interest. I don't know, not to be nationalists. This remains our big challenge.
Alper abi sana sorayım aynı şeyi.
Alper, let me ask you the same question. You are trying to be a freelance journalist as well. What's going to happen in this ever-changing world, and where do you think journalism is headed to? Well, yeah. What Amira said was very important, and there's something I would like to say about that quite briefly. So long as there are people willing to access information, was what she said. Yes, I think this is the only thing that we can hang on to. This is the only milestone we can hold on to. We have to be patient, otherwise we will fail. In 2015, as I said, we've had some discussions with American journalists. They failed to comprehend the dynamics here. They couldn't believe how about 50% of this community wished to ignore the accurate information, not take in that information. And I reminded them of the Vietnam War, and that's when they understood the dynamics. This was a battle with different fronts, and the fronts were fighting one another. During the Vietnam War, some researches had been conducted and some questionnaires were launched with questions such as the following. Americans are being asked, our soldiers, our American soldiers, have been killed by the Vietnamese in this village. Would you like to hear such news or not? And the vast majority of the American people did not wish to know about this information. They didn't want to hear such information. Some people may ignore some accurate information due to different reasons. Do you think there is animosity and polarization in Turkey just as harsh as the battle between the Vietnamese and the Americans? And I said, yes, that's exactly what's going on in Turkey, and that's when they finally understood what was going on. So, what can we hang on to? What can we hold on to? The American community used to be like this, and there were those willing to access accurate information, and the numbers increased. The Americans that were not degenerated, that were thirsty for accurate and correct information, changed the structure of the society. And thanks to the free journalists, as we have seen in the movie The Post, thanks to journalists such as Ben Bradley, people started understanding the significance of accessing information. Accessing information, not ignoring information, will serve greater goods for the society. Although it might be bitter truth, although it might be some kind of a harsh information, regardless, getting that information is very important. It's very critical for the society. This is what the Americans came to understand in time. This is going to happen in Turkey. The number of the people willing to access true information will increase. Other than that, there's nothing to be hopeful for. This is the only optimistic thing I may come up and say. As an old-fashioned, an old-school journalist, I don't know what the future of journalism will be. I'm just watching. I'm just a spectator. I'm just a viewer. In communities like ours, like the Turkish society, the readers do not punish journalists. And some journalists depend on this society to be able to circulate fake news or circulate misleading information. If we want to circulate some sort of information through media outlets online, we may not necessarily succeed every time we try, because our voices may not be heard due to a great number of other journalists and other fronts and other organizations which are in favor of the things that we do not support. But regardless, we have to be optimistic. Yes, that's correct. We need to be optimistic. Information doesn't get lost anymore. There might be less followers for true information. There might be less outlets that information could circulate, but the information remains there forever. It's very important for us to have that information accessible forever. And one of the greatest advantages that this new era creates for journalism is as the following. Through the words of my friend Levent Özdem, the newspapers or the photographers used to shoot mass rallies from a different angle, whereas today, by using smartphones, we can shoot video footages of mass social rallies and see the law enforcement attacking civilians, for example. We can identify the perpetrators easily. But in the past, it never used to be the case. In the past, you never used to see the faces and the identities of the law enforcement. So it's changing. The things that we do is changing. Our essence for the discussions is human rights. And that's why I think it's very important to be able to underline the fact that people can record anything that they witness, and that becomes a part of our global memoir. And it's very important to have access to that memoir for archival purposes. Can I say something? Yes. I can't help but think this is actually negative from a certain perspective, because it's actually a surge of information. It rains down on us at such a rate that we can't keep up. And people become insensitive towards the array of information that they're exposed to. In the past, we thought people would become more sensible the more they heard about the developments on a global scale. But it's just the opposite. Unfortunately, people are becoming desensitized because of the heavy array of information that they're exposed to. Instead of having fun, instead of entertainment, why do you think people will try to find information online that is a little bitter and a little scary? It's the exact opposite of what Orwell had in mind. Orwell stated that the governments and the nations were going to hide information from us, whereas Huxley draws a very different picture. Right now we have all the information accessible, but we don't want to access it because we just want to have fun. We want entertainment. Yes, thank you. Human rights movement will be the only way out of this turmoil. The horizons ahead of us, made clear by the human rights movement, will tell us where to go. We have to keep the utopia alive for the sake of the people, for the sake of Turkey, for the sake of the entire world. I would like to thank Ahmet Altan, Amira and Alper Görmüş. And at the same time, we would like to thank you for your participation, your attention, and your sincerity. You are supporting this foundation, and you are telling us to go on. And thank you for your kind moral support.